Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. Welcome to the first video in the autumn anime season, autumn 2021. And the first one is BL. That was a surprise, a welcome one to be sure. But with that said, welcome to our first video covering The Night Beyond the Tricornered Window, Episode 1, Encounter. But before we get to the video proper, a quick reminder if you haven't done so yet, to hit that subscribe button, ring the bell, set notifications to all, let all of AniTube know that you're here, and without further ado, let's go ahead and discuss this first episode, shall we? I would like to discuss, to begin with, the general vibe of the show. Right, there's a general vibe that I want to get into, and then I want to talk a bit about the main duo. And since that's pretty much like what this first episode is all about, is getting you set up for the general vibe of the series and getting you introduced to our main duo, who will likely be taking up a majority of the screen time, which I certainly hope so, because I do like the main two. I'm not like totally loving it yet, but I am like enjoying the main two. But when it comes to the show itself, I really enjoyed this first episode. I was pleasantly surprised. It didn't like knock my socks off or anything, but I was like, oh, I vibe, good. I wasn't like necessarily thinking I wasn't going to, but I was sort of like curious as to what it was gonna be. Since I know it was a Zero G series, which I'm not like, it's not as though I dislike Zero G, which is the studio, if you didn't know. But it's not like they really made anything that I'm like, they're not a heavy hitter studio for me. So I was sort of like, I wonder what this is gonna be. And when I looked into the cast and crew, besides like Nobunaga, Shimazaki as one of the main leads, I didn't really see a whole lot of like, oh, this person, I know them. Right, so I was sort of like the directors I don't know, since there's a chief and a chief director and a regular director. I don't really know them. I don't really know a lot of the different people. I believe Evan Call is doing the soundtrack. I believe that's his name, and I believe he did the soundtrack for Violet Evergarden. I could be wrong on that, but if true, that's cool. I probably should have wrote that down before I went to record, but alas, I am unprofessional. So that was kind of cool. Like, I think the fact that, like, I went into this with sort of low expectations. Like, I don't really know most of the staff, and usually I'm kind of judging the show based on the staff. So going in with sort of, like, no expectations at all, I was pleasantly surprised. It was legitimately pretty strong. And I do have to give my credit to the mangaka as well, since I think they did a really good job sort of setting up the plot at the beginning. I don't know if this is exactly how it goes about in the manga, but if it is similar to the manga's first early chapters, then I feel as though they did a really good job. And when it comes to the general vibe, it's actually really perfect for autumn. I couldn't imagine a better time for the show to come out than autumn, as we are in the spooky season. We are in October, so this sort of vibe feels really appropriate. There is this sort of general spookiness that sort of hangs over the show, but it's not like a jump scare fest. It's like proper spooky, right? Like, this is the type of spooky that I like in a lot of my shows, where it's not a jump scare fest, and it's not something that's like trying to horribly disturb you. It's just spooky, right? Like at the very beginning in particular, where we just sort of see the ghosts like standing around and staring at Mikado, right? It's very like, ugh. It's like unnerving, right? Like, it's like when you're going through a haunted house and you see like one of the cast members just sort of like doing something, and then slowly, not very quickly, just slowly turn and stare at you, and then they don't do anything. They just sort of stare, and that's somehow worse. You know, like it's that kind of feeling where like something, to me, you know what it people are really not gonna like that I'm about to say this. You know what it reminded me of? It reminded me of some of the more quiet moments in Silent Hill, where it's like not a jump scare fest, right? Like, Silent Hill isn't necessarily a jump scare fest, right? Like, a lot of Silent Hill is just sort of these like lingering, unsettling vibes, right? Where it's just not right. Like, you could just tell something's not right. It's not a jump scare fest. It's just sort of unsettling, right? And that's the vibe. Like, the fact that the ghosts just stare. And for some reason, that's almost worse than them like running at the screen. The fact that they just sort of stare and you're like waiting for them to do something and it never comes is very spooky, right? Like, it's very, very spooky. And then add in like the more devilish side of things, where we get into the sort of twisted, like mangled corpse and the cursed spirit that hangs over it at the end of the episode, and it's very like, ugh, just like unsettling, right? Like just very spooky. There's a general spooky, like unnerving vibe that hangs over the show, where you feel like even in the moments where you should be laughing, like when we see Mikado and Hiyakawa just sort of hanging out and being goofy, there's still this general like something could happen at any moment type of vibe to it, especially when Hiyakawa says like people die everywhere, right? Like when Mikado says like, but people died here, I don't really want to be here, and he's like, people die everywhere, you know, like at any point some spirit could appear and disturb the peace, right? It's a very generally just good vibe, right? And it's only compounded on when at the very tail end of the episode, in the post-credit scene, we get to properly hear Hira Erika, who is the sort of, we hear her name earlier in the episode, but in the post-credit scene, we hear her, and it's with these two women who are just sort of talking about what train to take in order to get to this specific spot. And it's unclear if one of them is Erika, if Erika is watching them. Like, you're not certain what's happening, but you just know that it's like, something's like not right, and it just feels so unsettling hearing these two have this normal conversation, and they're smiling at each other. But like the smiles, because of what's being said, the smiles seem almost sinister, like as though one of them is doing it. And then at the same time, you see it, like you see the camera sort of like watching them from weird angles as though they're being watched, so maybe Erika isn't even one of them. And what's being said is so like this sort of just like, my name is Hira Erika and I am going to curse you. You will die cursed. Like just over and over again. It's like, oh no, I don't like it. I don't like it, but I do. I do like it. You know what I mean? Where it's like, ooh, creepy, right? Like it's that. It's ooh, spooky. It's spooky, to quote Best Girl from the Best E3. But yeah, it's spooky, right? Just spooky. And on top of that, you get this really cool, like, slight noir tinge to everything. Slight noir tinge to everything, right? Which I think just adds to the spookiness, right? Especially when we talk about Hanzawa, the sort of grizzled detective character. He really adds this sort of, like, almost like film noir type vibe, right? Like, and even Mikado and Hiyakawa have this as well, where they're sort of playing spirit detectives. There's this general detective vibe over top of the series as well. And that, especially when we meet Hanzawa, who is like the grizzled detective, who needs their help on a case, right? That moment especially sort of makes everything feel more, I guess, sort of noirish. I can't find a better word than noir, right? And I love noir. Like, I think adding a tinge of noir is always good. It's not like super noir. It's not like neon noir or crime noir. It's just sort of this noir feel, where it's just this sort of like there's crime happening, right? But it's like noir in the feeling, not so much in the genre, right? Do you know what I'm talking about? I might not be making a whole ton of sense here, but it's a noir feeling. It's like a slight pinch of noir. It's not like a subgenre of noir. It's not like a noir itself. It's just a pinch of it, a feeling, right? Especially when we meet Hanzawa, there's like a pinch of it in there. And again, like I said, with Mikado and Hiyakawa, you get this sense that like they're trying to solve these mysteries. Hiyakawa isn't exactly smoking cigarettes and staring out the window saying like, of all the spirit detectives in all the world, he just had to stumble into me, right? Like, it's not that type of thing. It's more of just this. It's more so coming from Hanzawa, right? Because he sort of feels like that character, this sort of, you know, detective who's seen it all and been everywhere and knows that sometimes there's things that he can't truly explain, and that's where he's got to call in Hiyakawa and Mikado, right? This very sort of noir feeling, right? Just a worn down detective at the end of his rope, you know? And same thing goes with Hiyakawa. You feel as though he's this sort of detective who's also seen it all and been everywhere and maybe knows a little bit more about things than he's letting on, and I want to touch on that in a little bit. But also the sort of muted palette also helps with that, right? A lot of the colors aren't like popping and they're not like really bright and colorful, right? It's a very sort of muted palette, and I really enjoyed that. But the other general vibe that you should know going in, and you should not forget, is that this is a BL, and there's gonna be some anime fans who have an issue with that. And if you have an issue with that, tough. Watch something else, because the rest of us are going to enjoy The Night Beyond the Tricornered Window. Because if you haven't noticed, around here, we enjoy us some BL, right? We enjoy us some shipping, we enjoy us some BL. If you don't like that, there's plenty of other YouTube channels you could be watching. But, yeah, just know going in, this is definitely a BL. And if you're one of those people who don't hate on BL, you're just uncomfortable with it, totally understandable. You might want to skip this one, because it is very heavy on the BL. So if that just sort of, if that kind of vibe just makes you uncomfortable, you don't hate it, you're not hating on people who enjoy it, just sort of it's not your cup of tea, you might want to skip. But for me, I really enjoyed it. And if you can, you know, sort of move past that and you just want to see like a fun story, I think you'll probably enjoy this. It's definitely absurd with the powers, though, right? Because that's the thing, right? The BL comes in the form of the powers, right? So the way that this world works, like the way that our two characters are going to be spirit detectives, is that they're not exactly going to be using psychic powers. This is a Mob Psycho, right? Even though Hayakawa is kind of Reagan in some ways. He's like Reagan if Reagan was legit. But there's no psychic powers in the way you're thinking, right? It's not like a Mob Psycho power fest, right? Like there is powers, but it's not quite the way that you're thinking. It's more like gifts than powers, right? Like it's more, and not even gifts. It's more like curses than powers. But also, even though they are busting ghosts, they are not using proton packs. You know, the way that the powers work is that they're sort of sexual in nature. The abilities are like definitely intentionally sexual, right? Because as Hayakawa says, he learned from going online that ghosts sort of don't know how to deal with humanity. So when they see, or rather they are in witness to a sort of sexual moment, it can like repel them. So what happens is that like Hayakawa can quote unquote touch Mikado's core, and this causes energy to shoot out of Mikado, and that energy banishes the spirits. I will repeat. Hayakawa touches Mikado's core, and energy shoots out of Mikado. And then, you know, banishes the spirit. That is a metaphor. that is a metaphor. And as an ace boy, well, demi boy, but I'm on the ace spectrum, right? Like, a lot of sexual stuff makes me uncomfy, right? Now, when it comes to BL, you guys know I like my BL, right? So I could deal with sexual encounters. When it comes to BL and romance anime in general, I can deal with it, right? Like, when it comes to the sexual side, not so much like kissing and hugging, like that kind of stuff I'm comfortable with. Hand holding is very lewd, but we let it get a pass, right? But like, when it comes to the more sexual side of stuff, it's not like I'm like disgusted. I'm just sort of like, you'll see me like shuffle in my chair. I'm just sort of like, okay, right? Like and even when it comes to that sort of stuff, it's not like really, really uncomfy. It's just sort of like checking my watch and sort of shuffling, like not really something I'm like interested in. But I sort of see it more from like the romantic side, right? Like when sexual stuff is happening in a BL or a romance anime or anything of the sort, like a Yuri, anything, like my interest is more in sort of what this means for the two characters romantically, right? Like when it comes to the sexual side, I know a lot of people enjoy that part. You nasties. I see you, my fellow Fujo and Fudans. I see you. I know what you're into. I know what you're into. I see you. Good for you. Good for you, right? Like that's how I feel. I know that there's part of the BL and GL and even romance anime and just sort of like Gientai in general. I'm saying Gientai because I don't want to get the yellow monetization symbol of death. But I'm saying Gientai here. I know there's people who that's, you know, why they watch that kind of stuff. And if that's the case, like even ecchi stuff like that, I know that there's a lot of people who watch ecchi specifically for the ecchi and not like the shenanigans going on, not the comedy surrounding it. And this is not a knock on those people. It's just for me, not really my vibe, right? Like that's not the thing that I walk away from. With ecchi, I like looking at the ecchi, right? And I like admiring it. But as long as it's not happening to me, that's where it's. I think that's the biggest thing, right? As long as it's not happening to me, that's where I'm at with it. And that's where I'm at with Night Beyond the Tricornered window as well. Because it's not happening to me, and because a lot of it is clothed, a lot of clothes on, I have to appreciate it. And even though it's absurd that that's how the powers work, it kind of just adds to the show. It just makes it sort of fun. And I don't know. I should make a whole video on like why, like what it's like to be on the ace spectrum and still enjoy ecchi and BL and GL stuff. Because it's like, I feel like every time, or like anytime I call a character hot, right? I feel like people are like, but I know what you thought. My eyes say one thing, right? Like, even though the when it gets like super sexual, that's where I'm sort of like out. When it's just like characters looking attractive or like a really passionate kiss or something, I'm like, yeah, right? Like that's the kind of stuff I'm in for. But when it's like, when it gets a little too risque, that's where you sort of lose me. But characters being hot, I'm okay with that. I am A-okay with that. And I'm not gonna lie, while I'm sort of iffy on Mikado, not gonna lie, Mikado not quite my type, but Hiyakawa though. Hiyakawa definitely my type. And so when things get sort of like, when they're sort of like holding each other, I'm like, ooh, right? Like that kind of thing, that catches my attention. So yeah, I enjoy. Speaking of Hiyakawa though, and Mikado, I feel like now's a good time to really dive into those two, our main duo, right? The first initial thoughts on Mikado is that he's definitely a scaredy cat, but I have a feeling like this is eventually going to fade into the background of the show, because I think the more that Mikado is immersed in this world with Hiyakawa, like the less and less he's going to be scared. Hiyakawa even telling him that if you stay with me, I will make you less afraid of the things that you are forced to see. Because it's not like Mikado chooses this, right? Like, as we find out very early into the episode, Mikado sees spirits but does not want to, right? He sort of hides behind his glasses, right? Like, the glasses sort of, like, keep things at bay. Like, because even if he takes the glasses off, the rest of the world becomes blurry, but those ghosts, they remain in focus. And that's really scary. Like, I genuinely do feel bad for Mikado, because that would be terrifying, right? Like, seeing a ghost and then taking off your glasses and the world around you is blurry, but that ghost is still in focus, that would be really scary. Like, that would be very, very uncomfortable. And I do feel for the guy, because I know my boy just didn't, he's not equipped for this type of life, you know, whereas Hiyakawa definitely is. And he is very distrusting of Hiyakawa at first. Like, Mikado really does not trust him. He calls him a fraud. He doesn't really want anything to do with him. But as the episode continues, he sort of mellows out and starts to actually kind of get along with Hiyakawa, which I appreciate, right? They're not spending all their time in the, like, tsundere, like, it's not like I like you or anything, baka. Like, we're not spending a lot of time there, which I appreciate. Mikado is sort of playing more of a Watson type to Hiyakawa's Sherlock. And he's definitely more aware of his surroundings than Hiyakawa, right? Mikado is quick to notice that Hiyakawa's water he's about to run out of water in his glass, so he immediately asks the waitress for some more water. And Hiyakawa's like, I didn't even say anything. And Mikado's like, yeah, it's called reading the room, dude. And like, it's funny because like, he just noticed that Hiyakawa was going to, like, Hiyakawa's hand was sort of like gripping around the glass as though he was going to drink it, but Mikado realized that he was low on water, so he just orders him some more. And I do feel as though this is going to become more and more of a trend, that Mikado sort of sees the human side to all of this, whereas Hiyakawa might be sort of distant to the more human condition when it comes to spirits and dealing with spirits, whereas Mikado is definitely going to be playing the Watson type, right? Like, seeing it from a more human perspective. But speaking of Hiyakawa, he's definitely the more seasoned vet between the two, right? Hiyakawa's playing the Sherlock role, where he's more of the detective, right? Mikado's along for the ride because Mikado's powers actually aid Hiyakawa in banishing spirits, whereas Hiyakawa is more of this sort of seasoned paranormal guy who actually is aware of how to take these things out. And he's been around the block a few times. He's definitely a bit more confident than Mikado, and he's certainly more quirky. Hiyakawa even has like sort of an interesting way of speaking. Like, Mikado keeps bringing up that his Japanese is a bit odd, and he wonders if maybe he's from out of town. But Hiyakawa says that it's just because he didn't really talk much growing up. So because he didn't talk a whole lot, his speech pattern's a bit odd. And that's just sort of adds to his quirkiness, right? Like, he is a bit of a quirky character. He doesn't really have a whole lot of social cues, you know? Like, he gets, like, really all up in a girl's grill at one point when she tries to haggle for the price. And he just, like, knocks Mikado out at another point in the middle of the bookstore, and then just asks for Mikado from his boss, as though that's how that works. Like, Hiyakawa is a bit of an odd... He kind of reminds me in some ways of, like, the Doctor from Doctor Who, where he's just sort of, like, a quirky dude. It's not that he doesn't necessarily care that he is, right? Like, he doesn't care what you think. Like, Hiyakawa, like, if you told Hiyakawa he was being a bit weird, I don't think he would even blink. Like, he'd just be like, yeah, well, you're kind of weird. You know what I mean? Like, he wouldn't, like, he would just sort of throw it back at you, right? Like, he's weird because his job is weird, you know, like, and that he's sort of lacking certain social cues. Maybe not even by accident, but maybe on purpose. Like, he just doesn't care. And I think that that's what sort of draws me to Hiyakawa. He is that sort of little shit character that I do end up enjoying a lot in anime. Like, he just acts like a shithead, and it works, right? He even, like, bites Mikado at one point when they're using their powers, and Mikado's like, did you have to bite and lick me? Is that part of it? He's like, no, I just felt like it. It's like, Hiyakawa, like, come on, man. I will say, though, there's definitely a lot that this dude is hiding. Like, Hiyakawa... I definitely get the feeling as though there's more about himself and the world of the paranormal than he's sharing with Mikado. Like, there's a lot more that's going on beneath the surface that we just don't know yet. And I do find that really interesting, and I want to learn more about him. Again, as I said, as a ship, I'm not really there yet. I don't really know how I feel about these two as a pair. I can feel the vibe. I'm just not full out resonating, right? I can feel the vibe, not really dancing just yet. We'll see how it goes as the show carries on. But that is sort of all my thoughts on this first episode. I am very intrigued to see where it goes. I am very excited for more. And do let me know if you want that enjoying BL, GL, and ecchi shows as an ace boy, because I would definitely make that video. I feel like I could go on and on about that, because I feel like I didn't even really get my feelings across. Maybe I'll talk about it in a stream. You should follow me on I stream pretty much every day as well. Link in the description to the page. But yeah, I could probably talk about it on stream at some point. Like, I don't feel like I purposely, like, really, or not purposely, I don't feel like I properly got my thoughts across when it comes to, like, enjoying things, but also I think it's like I can enjoy it over there. It's just there's like a line where it becomes a little too far for me that makes me uncomfortable. And thankfully, so far with Night Beyond the Tricornered Window, because everybody's got the clothes on, it doesn't really cross that line for me. It's just sort of like fun and goofy so far. But yeah, like the kissing, the biting, not so much the kissing because we haven't seen a kiss yet, but like the biting, the chest, like holding each other, like putting his hand on his chest, stuff like that. Everything so far, I enjoy, right? There's just lines where it goes a little bit far for me. But yeah, video for a whole other day. Anyway, ending the video here. And there you have it, everyone. That is this week's video, so I certainly hope you enjoyed. If you did, don't forget to boop that up snoot and share if you care. And of course, make sure to hit that subscribe button if you would like to see more content from yours truly. And before we go, as always, I have to give a big thank you to my wonderful masters who help support this endeavor either by joining us on Patreon or by hitting that join button right beside the sub button to join as a member of the channel. So I would like to thank this month's Masters of Masters, Izevi, Elizabeth Just Elizabeth, Jeremy P, Asaki VT, JCran23, Matt87 Eagle, Shiorans, Stephen G, and Tristan G. Thank you all so much for being especially generous this month. I sincerely appreciate it. A huge thank you once again goes to our masters, and as a reminder, if you would like to join our masters, then be sure to check out that first link in the description to check out our Patreon page, or you can check out the join button right beside the sub button to join as a member of the channel and get a nifty badge next to your name. Either way, it is sincerely appreciated. And with that said, it is time for me to end today's video, but before we go, as always, clean your room. It's filthy.